Welcome back to Revise and Resubmit, the podcast that takes, those really dense academic papers and makes them surprisingly interesting. I'm Pavlov.
And I'm Nikita.
We've noticed a lot of you are tuning in, which is amazing, but I haven't quite hit that subscribe button yet.
Yeah, and that little button, honestly, it's so small, but it makes such a huge difference in helping us reach more people with these important discussions.
Right. It's true. Like the algorithms, those mysterious forces that decide what we all see and hear, they pay a lot of attention to subscriber numbers.
Yeah, think of it like the subscribing. It's like casting a vote for quality content, So these insightful research discussions don't just get lost in the sea of all the information out there.
More subscribers equals more visibility. Right. And that means more resources for us to make even deeper dives for you.
Yeah.
Maybe bring in experts for interviews, even do some live Q&A sessions where you can jump in.
Yeah, exactly. It's all about building a community around research,
Yeah.
where curiosity thrives and knowledge is shared and debated. Okay, so have you ever stopped and thought about if that random comment you made on Facebook could actually mess with your chances of getting that job you really want? You know what I mean?
Yeah, totally. I think it's something a lot of people don't even consider.
Well, today we're going to deep dive into that. We're talking about how companies look at social media when they're hiring people, and it's kind of wild what they're finding, honestly. You sent over some research about this, and it's pretty fascinating stuff. So we're going to break it all down for everyone listening, okay?
Yeah, for sure. I think the research you gave me offers a really good overview of this whole thing. We've got pieces of a research paper that looks specifically at how someone's political views, the things they say online, can actually affect whether they get hired.
Right.
It gets into the nitty-gritty, not just what employers look at online, but also how researchers even try to figure out someone's political leanings in the first place. So basically, our goal today is to go through all of this and pull out the most important stuff, the stuff you really need to know.
Exactly, because the big question we're trying to answer here is, does what you post online, especially about, politics, actually have a real impact on whether you get the job or not? And if it does, we need to understand the how and the why of it all.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's jump right in. The research you sent starts with what they call micro-level organizational research in Appendix I. Can you kind of break down what that even means? What are these studies finding?
Sure. Think of micro-level organizational research as zooming in, right? You're looking really closely at how individual choices and interactions within a company are affected by stuff political affiliation, are you a Democrat or a Republican, that kind of thing.
Okay.
Yeah. And ideology, your overall political beliefs. These studies are trying to see how all of this plays into things like hiring decisions and even the general vibe of a workplace, how people get along. What's really interesting is that researchers use all sorts of different ways to try and measure something as complex as someone's political views.
Right, because it's not always super obvious what someone's political beliefs are, right?
Absolutely.
So how do they even measure that in these studies?
Well, there are a bunch of really interesting approaches. One way is to look at, get this, campaign donations.
Oh.
So there was this study back in 2018 by Burmis and McDonald.
Okay.
And they found a link between the political donations people made and how likely they were to quit their jobs, employee turnover.
Oh, wow.
And then you have Carnahan and Greenwood, same year, 2018. They looked at how the political leanings of law firm partners, again, based on their donations, were connected to, get this, the hiring of female associates.
No.
Yeah, they even looked at whether those women were put on certain types of teams depending on the partner's politics. So think about that. Your financial support for a political party could actually be used to, maybe even subconsciously form an opinion about you as a potential employee.
Wow, that's crazy. So using money, financial contributions as a way to sort of guess someone's political leanings, that's pretty indirect, but I guess it's a way to measure it, right?
Right, it's a way to get some data.
What other methods are they using?
Well, another method they use is looking at the overall voting patterns of entire counties.
Okay.
The idea is to guess what the political party of the decision makers might be based on where they live. A study by Gift and Gift back in 2015 did this, and they found something pretty interesting. Applicants who were, assumed to be from the opposite political party, just based on their county, got way fewer calls back for interviews. Yeah, and here's the thing. They got fewer calls than people who didn't even mention any political affiliation at all. So basically, even the general political atmosphere of where you live, your zip code, could potentially affect whether you even get your foot in the door for a job.
So you're saying, like, even just being perceived as being on the other side of the political spectrum could hurt your chances before you even get to talk to anyone?
Yeah, that's what the research suggests.
Wow.
And then you have studies that just straight up ask decision makers about their own political beliefs.
Okay.
So O'Connick and a bunch of other researchers, they did a study in 2021, and they found that decision makers who said they were conservative were less likely to give positive info when they were trying to recruit women for leadership positions. It's like their own political views might be, unintentionally affecting how they present opportunities to potential candidates.
So the political beliefs of the person doing the hiring can also play a role in who they even consider for a job, basically.
Exactly. And this leads us to the studies that bring in social media directly.
Okay, now we're getting to the good stuff.
Right. So Roth and some other folks, they did a study in 2020 where they showed hiring managers and applicants' political affiliation on Facebook. And guess what? If the hiring manager agreed with the applicant's political party, they saw the applicant as more similar to themselves, liked them more, and rated them higher for the job. But if they disagreed with the applicant's politics, those ratings went down. So what you share about your politics online, even just stating your affiliation, can really make a difference in how a potential employer sees you.
Okay, now this is where it gets really interesting because we're not talking about assumptions anymore.
Right.
We're talking about what's actually out there online for people to see.
It's all out in the open.
Like actually seeing someone say they're a Democrat or a Republican on Facebook, that can have a real effect on a hiring decision.
Absolutely. And then there's this study from 2020 by Roe v. Wade and a team of researchers, and they took this a step further. They looked at the whole idea of perceived overall similarity.
Okay.
How much someone feels like they have things in common with another person, and they tied that to, again, political affiliations shown on Facebook and LinkedIn. And they compared how these dynamics played out on those two different platforms. And get this, they found some evidence that the specific platform might actually matter.
Oh, really?
Yeah, suggesting that where you see this info, the context, could change how you interpret it.
Okay, that makes sense. Like Facebook is more for, personal stuff, random thoughts, whatever.
Right.
LinkedIn is supposed to be more professional, so maybe you wouldn't expect to see someone's strong political opinions there.
Exactly. And then, to top it all off, there's a study from 2024 by Roth and others. They looked at a pretty extreme situation called doxing, where someone outside of the hiring process, like a total stranger, intentionally shares an applicant's political info with the employer. Yeah, and their research suggests that this kind of thing, having your political views, like thrown at an employer by someone else, can seriously impact how similar they think you are to them, make them suspicious of you, and even affect their expectations of how well you'll do the job and how they see the company itself. Plus, it can even raise concerns about potential retaliation down the line.
Oh, man. So it's not just what employers might find themselves, but what other people might, intentionally bring to their attention.
It adds a whole other layer of complexity to it all.
Yeah.
And it's really important to understand, as we look at all of these studies, the sheer range of things they were looking at, the things being affected by these political factors. These included, how often employees quit their jobs, how many women were hired, how many interview callbacks people got, even how positive the language in job descriptions was. They also looked at those perceptions of similarity in liking, hireability ratings, expected job performance, and even how suspicious the employer felt about the applicant. It's a lot to take in.
Yeah, it's a lot. And they're analyzing all of this from different angles, right? Sometimes they're focused on the individual hiring manager, sometimes on the overall political leanings of a party, and sometimes on more general ideological stances. Plus, as we've been talking about, social media platforms, especially Facebook and LinkedIn, are becoming a bigger and bigger part of this research.
Exactly. It's they're trying to build this really detailed picture of how political affiliations and ideologies are woven into the fabric of how companies make decisions, particularly when it comes to hiring.
Okay, so that gives us a really solid foundation of the research itself. Now, the stuff you sent me also included Appendix 2, which actually shows some real examples of what they call political view cues. These are actual tweets about DACA. Can you kind of walk us through what sorts of viewpoints are being expressed in those examples? Yeah,
Appendix 2 is really cool because it gives us a real-world glimpse of the kinds of political statements people are putting out there. These tweets are categorized as either anti or pro-DACA, the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program. To make this more concrete, let's take a look at a couple. One of the anti-tweets, labeled anti-08, says this. Remember, the reason why DACA was a terrible idea is not because it was unconstitutional. It was because amnesty will destroy our country. You cannot have law and order and secure our borders if you create a magnet like amnesty. Ending DACA is the only way to fix DACA. Hashtag stop DACA.
Wow, that's pretty intense.
It is. It's a strong statement.
You can really see their political beliefs in that. What's a contrasting pro-DACA tweet like?
Okay, so on the other side, we have Pro-8, and it says, immigration is polarizing, but we forget how this impacts families. We should improve border security while also offering a better pathway to citizenship through immigration reform. Hashtag protect the dreamers. Hashtag defend DACA. Hashtag no human is illegal. Hashtag DACA. Hashtag immigration. Hashtag dreamer.
So that one really focuses on the human side of things.
Exactly. It's appealing to a sense of empathy. You can immediately see how different the perspectives are, right?
Totally, yeah. It's like night and day. The values and like the political ideologies behind those statements are super clear. So what about another pair, like an anti-10 tweet?
Okay, anti-10 reads, what kind of message do we send to the world if we reward the children of illegal criminals the gift of citizenship in a country whose laws their parents disrespected? Hashtag Cupcot. Hashtag DACA's over party.
Okay, so that one frames it in terms of the law and like the consequences of breaking it.
Yeah.
What about the corresponding Pro-10?
All right, so Pro-10 says this. They are Americans in their hearts, their minds, in every single way, except one on paper. Hashtag protect the dreamers. Hashtag defend DACA.
So that one's all about like identity and belonging. It's interesting to see the different angles people take on the same issue. These examples really show you the kinds of strong, diverse political viewpoints that are out there, stuff that employers or anyone really could easily find on someone's social media. And it's not subtle, like they're not hiding their beliefs.
No, they're putting it out there.
Right, these are direct expressions of what they think.
Exactly. And these tweets are like, real life examples of those cues we were talking about, the things that hiring managers might come across.
Right.
They're the raw material that those perceptions and judgments are built from.
Okay, so employers might see these kinds of posts, but how do researchers actually measure the effect of these cues on the people making the hiring decisions? Appendix 3rd talks about something called the measurement of perceptions. What are they even trying to measure?
This is where the research gets into like the fuzzy stuff, the subjective stuff.
Yeah.
They're trying to measure how these political cues affect what employers actually think and feel about a candidate.
Right.
They use these things called Likert scales, which are basically rating scales,
Okay.
to measure stuff like perceived overall similarity.
Okay.
This is how much the employer feels like they're, on the same page as the applicant, like in terms of their worldview, their values, that kind of thing. They might ask something like, the job applicant and I are similar in terms of our outlook, perspective, and values, and the person would rate how much they agree on a scale, like from 1 to 7, for example. So it's an attempt to take a feeling, like a sense of connection, and put a number on it.
So it's like trying to quantify something that feels like kind of impossible to measure.
Exactly.
What other things are they trying to measure?
They also look at liking, which is more straightforward.
Okay.
They might ask, how much do you like this job applicant? And again, use a similar scale.
Okay.
Then there's expected task performance, which is all about whether they think the applicant can actually do the job. They might use statements like, the job applicant can be expected to adequately complete assigned duties.
Right, that makes sense.
And then there's expected organizational citizenship, which tries to figure out if they see the applicant as someone who will go above and beyond, be a team player. They might ask about their likelihood to help others who have heavy workloads, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
These are all directly related to how an employer would evaluate whether someone would be a good fit for the company.
Right, yeah. Those all seem super relevant to judging a candidate's potential.
Totally.
But what about the political views themselves?
Oh, yeah, they measure that too.
Yeah.
They look at something called identification, which is about how much someone connects with a particular political view. For example, they might ask, when someone criticizes X people with this view, it feels like a personal insult. So it's about feeling personally invested in that viewpoint.
Right.
And then there's disidentification, which is the opposite, like a sense of distance or even feeling uncomfortable with a view. They might ask, I would be embarrassed to be part of X. This helps researchers understand how strong someone's feelings are about these political stances.
Okay, yeah, so they're trying to measure, like, the intensity of someone's beliefs.
Exactly. And you mentioned reliability before, whether these measures are actually consistent.
Right.
And the research shows that they have high internal consistency, meaning the questions they use to measure each of these things are actually measuring what they're supposed to. So we can be more confident in the findings about these perceptions.
That makes sense. So we've got research that suggests that political views can influence hiring decisions. We have real-world examples of those views being shared online. And we have ways that researchers try to measure how people perceive those views. Now, let's switch gears and look at things from the employer's perspective.
Okay.
Appendix 4 shares some findings from hiring professionals who actually use social media as part of their background checks on candidates. What did they find?
This study is really interesting because it gives us a look at why and how employers are using social media to screen potential hires.
Yeah.
One big takeaway is what they're really looking for. Many of them are specifically trying to find what they consider deal breakers, those red flags.
Right.
In fact, a pretty big chunk of them, like a third of those surveyed, said that their main goal was to find a reason not to hire someone.
So it's less about finding reasons to hire someone and more about finding reasons to say no.
Exactly. It's like they're coming at it from a place of trying to eliminate candidates rather than finding the best fit.
Oh.
And when they're looking at platforms like Facebook and Twitter, they tend to focus on certain types of info. Table A1 in the appendix breaks it down. Both platforms, they're looking at inappropriate content and things that reveal someone's personality. But there are some interesting differences. For example, on Twitter, they're more likely to look for issues related to online interaction, like are they being toxic or argumentative.
Right.
But on Facebook, the focus shifts more to hate speech and politics.
And the numbers really show that, right?
They do. Almost 30% of the raters said they looked for political content on Facebook, compared to only around 11% on Twitter.
Yeah.
It kind of supports that idea that Facebook is seen as a space where people are more open about their political beliefs, more likely to share that kind of stuff.
Totally. And something else that really stood out from this study was how much employers expect to see someone's true self on these platforms.
Yeah, that's a big one.
Table A2 has some quotes from the raters that really show this. One person says, "Twitter is where I go to really see who they are. I feel people are most opinionated and themselves there."
Right. It's like they think it's the most unfiltered version of someone.
And another one says, "I usually get my best results from Facebook as people aren't as concerned about what they post on that site." So there's this idea that what people share on social media is a genuine reflection of their character, who they really are.
It's almost like they think it's a window into someone's soul.
Yeah, basically. And that's what they're trying to see.
Right.
And that belief is why they're so focused on finding those red flags.
Totally.
The survey also asked them about times when they actually stopped the hiring process because of something they found online.
Yeah.
And the examples they gave were things like hate speech or viewpoints that went against the company's values or policies.
It makes sense, right?
Yeah, totally. If someone is saying stuff online that clashes with what the company stands for, or if they seem like a potential risk, then of course the employer might think twice about hiring them.
Yeah, it's all about managing risk for the company.
Totally.
So this research, the qualitative stuff, really adds to what we learned from the quantitative studies, because it shows us how hiring professionals are actually using social media and what's motivating them.
Right. Okay, so let's wrap this up and make sure everyone listening understands what we've learned here. The research suggests that your political affiliations can actually affect whether you get hired. We've seen real-world examples of the kinds of political stuff people share online. We know that these views can shape how people see each other, whether they feel like they have things in common or not. And we've seen that employers are definitely using social media to vet candidates, and a lot of times they're looking for reasons to say no, especially if they find something related to political views that they don't like, particularly on Facebook.
You got it.
And they really believe that what they see online is the real you.
Yeah, that's a key point. It's not just about the research findings. It's about understanding how employers are actually approaching this. They're out there looking at your social media, and they're forming opinions based on what they find.
So whatever your political beliefs are, or even if you're not super tech savvy, this is something you need to be aware of. That random comment you make online or that article you share, it could all become part of how a potential employer judges you.
Absolutely. It's like you have to think about your digital footprint as an extension of your resume, your professional image. And it's a tricky thing, right? Because we also want to be able to express ourselves authentically online.
Right.
So it leads to a really important question. How do you balance that need for self-expression with the reality that potential employers are looking and they're forming judgments? It's a tough one, and something everyone needs to think about as they manage their online presence and their career goals.
Absolutely. It's a new world out there, that's for sure.
It is.
Well, thanks for breaking all of that down for us. I think that was really insightful.
No problem. Happy to do it.
And don't forget to subscribe to Revise and Resubmit on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And if you're enjoying the show and want to support us in creating more insightful content, consider becoming a patron on Patreon. Every contribution helps us continue this journey of exploration and discovery. Until next time, keep those minds curious, keep questioning, and keep revising and resubmitting.